All right.
What a weird experience.
Living?
Just existing.
Yeah.
It's just one of those ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready too.
Oh, hey, you.
Oh, hi.
Look at you over there by the table.
Hey, sugar.
Shut
How
up.
are you? How are your roses?
My roses are well tended.
You deadheaded any of
My
them?
garden, very gardened. My mastered
Yeah.
garden in my backyard.
Hell yeah. Welcome to the low ceiling.
I'm Pri.
What?
What?
I'm Jon. Today we're talking about a movie that only 4 people on Earth have seen, including the filmmaker, Master Gardener. But
Mr. Gardner.
more importantly, we're doing another recent one. This is a 2023 film.
Yeah.
But we're probably going to talk a lot about a couple other Paul Schrader movies.
Oh, man.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
I have a confession to make.
Uh-oh.
I did something yesterday that I promised I wouldn't do a decade ago.
What'd you do?
I watched Black Swan.
Oh, my God. Your face right now. Jesus.
I'm embarrassed to say. I did it because we might get into another dancing film later. And I rewatched it because I found there was some similarities. We're either going to do Honey or Step Up Revolution. We haven't decided yet which.
I already made the decision for you. It's going to be Honey.
Yeah. I mean, Jessica Alba is at her hottest. Yeah.
Goddamn right. That intro. Issa, if you're listening, she's going to be ecstatic to hear about her Honey review.
I always thought that Black Swan was just a ripoff of Honey.
I'm telling you, a
And,
weak one at that.
Yeah, like it was very derivative.
Ugh. Try to get on Alba's level, my dudes.
Yeah, Darren, get it together. Anyway, that was my confession that I had to make.
Why?
Why did I watch Black Swan?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? We'll get into it when we talk about our other dancing film, because I have more to say about that movie and Black Swan at that time. And it's not going to be Black Swan. It's going to be something actually much better.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
The Red Sparrow.
Red Sparrow too.
Red Sparrow, Black Swan.
The one-legged ballet dancer.
Jesus Christ.
Master Gardener.
Yeah, man.
So we're talking about today,
That's
as we
right.
said. In preparation, you watched First Reformed for the first time. I
First time.
rewatched Card Counter.
Mm-hmm. Card Counter was one of the ones we saw together
Yes.
at the cinemas.
First one we saw together. We
Another
mentioned it
movie
before.
that only 4 other people have probably seen, including Steven, I think, because
Yeah.
big fans. We just kind of... I mean, Oscar Isaac, he can get it. But
Excuse me, Tiffany Haddish can get it. She is a fucking smoke show in that
Incredible.
movie. Holy, she looks
Incredible.
amazing.
I mean, look, I love Tiff, right? She's fucking hilarious. She's got everything going on. I did not expect that kind of elevated, restrained performance.
You know what I love about her performance in that movie?
Yeah.
And this is true about all 3 of these films that we're talking about. Paul Schrader is a strange director, and I have to say, I'm a little worried about talking too deeply about Paul Schrader because I'm a total novice. I've only actually seen these 3 films, and like him and Brian De Palma are like 2 directors that I'm not educated enough on, but I want to learn more about.
Yeah.
But all 3 of these movies, when you start watching them, you're like, this is weird. The acting is weird. There's something about it. And then once you get going, you're just kind of like, oh, I don't really care.
Yeah.
And when Tiffany Haddish first shows up, you're just kind of like, it's
What?
really restrained
Yeah.
what she's doing. And then once you get into it, you're just like, oh, she's acting normal. And I kind of like that. Like, she's really good in that movie.
She's just like, you would not have expected a comedian to be in
No.
this one in the first place. And then when she shows up, you're hoping for some kind of levity from the seriousness and the quiet tone of the movies in general. But
Yeah.
it's kind of a refreshing match of that pace.
Oh, yeah. I think she's great. I think
Yeah,
she's
man.
excellent. I got to say, I rewatched. This is the second time I've seen Card Counter, plus the time we saw it in theaters.
Yeah.
And I like it a lot more. I
Yeah.
liked it in theaters, but I was like, oh man, this movie's so good. And I gotta admit, I got like a little emotional at a certain part in it where I was
100%.
like, oh, I kind of get this movie better,
Yeah.
you know? But let's talk about First Reformed first,
Yeah.
because you saw it for the first time.
Oh my God. And what a time.
Yeah.
I mean, First Reformed is as timely a political message as when it first came out, right?
Yeah.
It is as relevant today as it will be in the next 40, 50 years.
It's a little unsettling
It
how
is
relevant it is.
extremely on
Yeah.
the nose about our state as humanity and climate change. And Paul Schrader does not shy away from talking about it in a nearly extremist way as it is portrayed.
I always think about this scene in First Reformed when they have the funeral for the guy, and behind them is like the toxic waste,
Yeah.
like shipyard
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That it's such a haunting idea, and
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Where he's clearly the guy is trying to deliver a message
yeah,
through his own death, being like, you know what, I killed myself because this is not a world that any child should be brought into. It
yeah.
is polluted, it is wasted, and let this be a message to the future generation that it's late. It's too late.
It's a rough movie, and
Yeah.
and something about First Reformed that I find interesting, because like this is kind of like an unofficial trilogy of films.
Yeah.
First Reformed, the other two are actually kind of hopeful, and First Reformed is really not. It's a really, really dark movie.
Do you want to tell us like a brief summary of what First Reformed is?
Yeah.
Like a couple?
So Ethan Hawke plays a priest at this kind of like dying church in upstate New York.
It's basically a museum at this point.
It's like mostly a museum, and it's like given way to this mega church run by Cedric the Entertainer, who's excellent in that movie. But it's kind of like this interesting study, and basically like he meets this young couple, and the young man of the couple is like heavily beaten down by the world of the climate change disaster that's happening. And his young pregnant wife, played by Amanda Seyfried, is also involved, and they kind of become friends. And like all three of these films, an older man kind of at the end of his rope meets a younger woman who changes his life, basically.
Right.
And that's like a theme that runs throughout these movies.
Yeah.
And and then it kind of goes from there. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's an absolutely excellent film, but it is rough. I had the pleasure of introducing that movie to my family, and they hated me for about a day after we watched it, I think, because they were like, boy, thanks.
Just a casual Christmas watch.
I'll never look at Barbed Wire the same.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's a really, really good movie.
Yeah,
But-
highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I watched it over like any child does on my cell phone for a week. I watched it like
In
a
doses.
TV show
Yeah.
in doses. Man, it is, and I'm glad I consumed it that way too. I would have loved to have seen it in one sitting at the cinemas, but it just felt completely different when you're tucked in bed and you have a sheet over your head and you're just watching this guy, a reverend or a priest played by Ethan Hawke, who is just this is a fucking career performance.
Amazing performance.
He is.
Yeah.
This is my favorite work by him. And then maybe the second one is Sinister, probably, because that is also fucking great.
Ethan Hawke is just a G. He's done so many good
God
things. like-
damn.
right. He wasn't nominated for Best Actor,
Shit, man.
but Schrader was nominated for Best Original Screenplay.
Ethan Hawke just stole it. Just stole the show for me. He there's parts where you can't look away from him. Well, he's there in every single scene, right? This is an Ethan Hawke movie,
Yeah.
period. There's not a moment that goes without him. Even Cedric the Entertainer, when they're conversing, when they're talking to each other, there's like this friendliness that evolves into this, man, what are you doing? Get a hold of yourself.
Yeah.
Versus younger Ethan Hawke being like, I don't understand why you can't see my point of view.
Yeah.
We're in a dying world and you want to have a religious ceremony. So that
Yeah.
was cool.
I think I definitely think that's like one of the leading performances of that decade. Like I think it's pretty underrated, and yeah, it was pretty amazing when you look back at it. And like Ethan Hawke he's such a good actor, but there's definitely stuff where you're just kind of like he does a lot of like small silly, goofy, like The Purge and shit like that.
Yeah.
But he's an amazing actor, and he can definitely throw in an incredible performance. And like, yeah, this is just one of them. I don't know.
I know you said the other two movies by Schrader are more hopeful, including Master Gardner, and Card Counter. You don't think this one also has a positive message?
I don't know. I haven't seen it for a while. What is your thesis on that?
So here's where the spoilers come in, dear audience. So you might want to fair warning. So in First Reformed, there is a moment where pregnant Amanda Seyfried comes to her Reverend Ethan Hawke saying, "My husband is a political extremist activist who was in prison in Canada for all of his protests, and now he is a man of despair. I share his hopes and beliefs, but I don't share his despair, that he's just ready to kill himself, and I'm pregnant, but he wants me to abort this baby." To which, over time, ultimately, her husband does kill himself, and she continues to go to Ethan Hawke for counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one scene where she tells him that me and my husband, we used to just be fully clothed and laying on top of each other, just to be connected.
It's probably like the key moment of the film.
Yeah. And that is when, so of course, this is almost like a tantric, sexy version of a priest having a out-of-body religious / sexual experience with this other pregnant lady, fully clothed, almost like Mary or whatever, right? I think her name is Mary in the movie, I think. And there's a scene where, quite surreally, they ascend and then stars appear, and then it's like a...
Now, there's a scene like this in all three of these films, right?
Yes.
That's something that these three films share. There is this
surreal quality.
A surreal, transcendental, meditative scene. And that's the scene in the Card Counter that really got me in the heart.
Yeah.
And we'll get to it, but it's an interesting thing when, after I watched Master Gardener, and we'll talk about that one too.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, he's made like three of the same film.
Yes.
That are dressed in different clothes.
100%.
I don't say that in like a derisive way.
No.
I think Master Gardener is the weakest of the three.
Yeah.
But like they're so clearly all connected, and it's so interesting. Yeah.
And you know what? I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, because there are three tropes, quote unquote, that repeat through all three films. One, this transcendental moment. Two,
man meets woman.
Man meets way younger woman.
Not so much in Card Counter, but younger.
Okay,
certainly.
Fair. And third one, man at the table writing in his journal.
Man at the table writing in the... Yeah.
All three of them meditative dudes. All three of them troubled. Right? And there's something to be said about just the art and effort of journaling every single day.
Yeah.
And you partake in this routine.
Yeah, I do.
Is it as torturous as Paul Schrader makes it seem, or is it as liberating?
No, I don't find it to be as like intense as they do. Like, a Card Counter has a ton of it, and there's a lot of stuff where I'm just like, I can't write this articulately in my journal about stuff. You know, I just like can't. No, I don't know. Maybe I'm not giving it enough oomph, or enough je ne sais quoi, but I don't find it as,
When you do, like, you clearly have something to say when you sit down to do it, right? Whether it's your feeling or the activity of the day or what have you, which is what these characters in the movie end up doing, which is typically how their outlook in life, and then they just pen it down. Do you find that makes you feel differently after you've done the activity of writing?
Sometimes, like if I feel like sometimes if I have to get something off my chest, if I'm like upset about something and I write it down, it definitely feels like you're like expelling it onto the page, and you don't have to. This is getting very personal, but like you don't, like, once you've kind of like gotten that, you know, you don't really have to think about it anymore, because you have that kind of crystallized in this moment. You know what I mean? I think like with like a lot of writing, it's like the idea, like once it's left your head and onto the page, even if it's like an idea for fiction or a song or a poem or something like that, it's like, it's almost like it's, you know, that it's stored elsewhere. And so you kind of stop thinking about it. At least I do, you know, because you can get it down on, somewhere, basically. Yeah. Kind of like, you know what's interesting? I've said this about this podcast. You and I have talked about it. And sometimes I've been like, you know, after we talk about a movie, I don't really feel like watching it again for a while, at least, you know, because we've just like been able to record it in a place where it'll probably be at least for another 3 months, you know, until Spotify crashes and burns. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that when you write, you're okay, this is not to fucking keep boosting your ego, but you're one of the most honest people I know. Like, there's no filter to you.
Shut the fuck up.
You're what'd you say about me? There's never any farce. There's almost
I
always.
just tell like it is. I'm just brutally honest, and people just have to like, you know, they just like have to take me for me.
I'm just honest.
Yeah, I was honest. But nobody likes me.
You're the opposite of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's never a moment of being dishonest with yourself. So I am imagining your diary, like your journal entry, is also that way.
Maybe.
When you write it down, do you ever filter yourself?
Yeah, I think so. The weird thing is, sometimes I do think about this, because I heard a comedian say this like a long time ago, where they were like, they made a joke being like, people who write in journals just clearly want them to be found sometime and like published, right? Like like Franz Kafka or like Samuel Pepys or whatever, which I think is like really funny, because it's like whenever you do like censor yourself, it's kind of like, well, why? Like, who cares? You know, nobody should be seeing this.
Totally.
But I don't think that I do. I think that like, but it's certainly not as like expansive as when I talk about stuff to you or to a close friend, you know, because it's just such a pain to write by hand, as you've seen me do. Like, it's just like such a way of, it's like such a slog.
Isn't that the point of writing on paper? Because you can't erase anything. Like, once you've written it down,
I guess
best thing you can do is cross it out. But once it's there, it's there. Versus writing on a computer where you can just delete the whole thing.
Yeah, I think there's like, I've found this even when I was in university, and I think there's like been academic studies that have found that you have a better connection to the thing when you write it down by hand. So like taking notes in universities, like it's better if you take it by hand rather than on the computer, because it actually stays in your mind a lot better. And I did find that, like, I do find that it, you know, but I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah. This is what you want to talk about?
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Because, like, I always see you writing, but I don't know how it makes you feel.
Usually better, honestly. It's kind of like meditation, which I think is like what he's trying to show, Paul Schrader is trying to show in these movies, is like the meditative aspects of it are actually where like all of these three men are centered. Yeah. You know? And because all three of them have objectionable thoughts and feelings, it is kind of the only place they can really express them.
Yeah,
right?
Without judgment.
Yeah.
Because I was just about to make a silly goose comment about like, oh, men will do anything but go to therapy or whatever. But like, they do. These men in his movies do confide in friends or elders or other parishioners, whatever, priests, but they're almost always judged. And then they return inevitably to their moleskin, whatever, notebook.
Yeah. Can we talk about Card Counter?
Hit me.
So I had a brilliant thought about it. And maybe now that I said that, I feel very pressured to put it out. So Card Counter. Yeah. Just a brief overview of Card Counter. Oscar Isaac plays a former military man who drives around the country and plays blackjack and poker. He bets small. He wins modestly. Yeah. And that's all he does. He likes to play cards. And he spent 8.5 years in prison for being one of the people who tortured Iraqis at Abu Ghraib. He was part of the enhanced interrogation thing. Yeah. And then basically he meets a young Ty Sheridan who asks him to do an objectionable task. Yeah. Or help him do that. And he also meets Tiffany Haddish, who's a poker backer, who says, like, you should come play cards with me. Yeah. Oscar Isaac eventually does because he wants to help Ty Sheridan get out from under his debts and also not help him commit this crime. Oscar Isaac, in that movie, so this is like my thematic feeling of that film. He goes to prison. He gets out, and he creates his own prison of poker, and he conveniently creates a world where he doesn't have to get emotionally involved, because there's nothing worse. You leave emotion at the door at the poker table, as Brad Pitt says in Ocean's 11, as he teaches Topher Grace in Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
Leave emotion at the door, right?
Yeah.
And then, and because if you're emotional, it's called tilt. It's called poker tilt, as Tiffany Haddish explains in the film. And then when he meets Ty Sheridan and Tiffany Haddish, he tilts.
Right.
And then he is no longer in his prison.
Yeah.
And so the only thing he can do is return to actual prison. And that's basically the thematic flow of the film. But the tilting is worth it because he's created this connection with Tiffany Haddish. And even though spoiler alert here. Even though Ty Sheridan dies, he has done something to try and help this young man, and he can't get to him. So, and I said just before we recorded, I was like, oh, there's this quote that really struck me. In the transcendental, surreal moment of the card counter is when Tiffany Haddish takes him to the garden full of lights, right?
Yeah.
And this is the part where I got very emotional because they're walking through that arc, and Tiffany Haddish asks him, she's like, what did you do to go to prison? And he doesn't tell her because he's a very private person. And then she says, it must have been really bad. But she doesn't judge him for it.
Yeah.
And she knows that it must have been bad to go 8.5 years in prison. And they're walking through this arc, and they touch hands, and they hold hands as they're going through. And Oscar Isaac says in the voiceover, he says, the feeling of being forgiven by another and forgiving oneself are so much alike, there's no point in keeping them distinct. Which applies to all three of these films, basically. God. It is like the thesis statement of like all of these movies. Yeah. Because I think that's a big theme in Master Gardener as well.
I have some thoughts on that for Master Gardener specifically.
Okay.
But let's talk about plot first, because it might be more relevant as we get into it.
Well, so to go over the plot of Master Gardener, we're finally getting into it. And it's hard because I've been thinking so much of these three films as like one piece of work.
Totally.
So Master Gardener is about Joel Egerton plays Narvel Roth. That's his actual name, Narvel. He works in a beautiful garden for Sigourney Weaver, and he's a master gardener. He's really into it, as we hear in his voiceover. He fucking loves gardening.
He fucking loves gardening, dude.
Yeah. He really loves gardening.
Man puts the man in manure.
Yeah.
He's so into it.
And as we find out in a very tense moment, he is in witness protection. He's a former white supremacist because he is covered in Nazi tattoos.
Just fucking front and back.
There's a moment where he takes his shirt off in private, and his back is just covered in these tattoos. That's very, very intense. Just it's so interesting because all he's doing is removing his shirt. Yeah. And like you're just like, oh my God.
Because
holy shit.
In all the scenes leading up to that moment, you see him surrounded. He works in that garden with a black girl, with another maybe a Latina lady, and then another brown guy. Yeah.
And he's well liked, and he gets along with them, and all of this stuff.
He's their boss, basically.
He is their boss, but he's like he seems like a really good guy. And there's hints of like violence, right? Yeah. There's some thoughts and like dream little bits,
flashbacks.
But then just this moment where he takes his shirt off, and you're just like, now I knew that was the story. Yeah. But that moment you're just like, fucking
what
hell.
The
holy
fuck is
shit.
Going
He's
on?
like fucking Edward Norton in American History X style. Just, Like the moment, there's a similar moment in American History X when Edward Norton removes his shirt in prison in front of all the prison yard, and he has the swastika on his chest, and that is like, oh boy. Yeah,
it's just as haunting as that moment with Matt Walsh in Community when he takes his shirt off and he's got a swastika and he says, "It's just a maze.
It's gonna be a maze." He's racist.
Fucking hell. All three equally haunting.
Yeah. And so sorry, to get to the plot, Sigourney Weaver, her grand niece has to come and live with her, and Sigourney Weaver insists to Narvel, she's like, hey, I want you to take her on as an apprentice. Yeah. She's half black. Bring her here, take her on as an apprentice, give her some guidance, stuff like that.
Because she's my niece?
Grandniece.
Grandniece.
And grandniece from the side of the family that Sigourney Weaver clearly doesn't approve of.
Yeah.
And
half black.
yeah, she uses a term I don't really want to say because it's just so like, yeah, it's
Sigourney
really,
Weaver.
it's not like fully racist, but it's like,
yeah, it's not. It's not
really
good.
distasteful
It's
what she
not
says
good.
about her, and she says it so offhandedly. It's so gross.
Right, because she is also a sympathizer without saying it so much.
There's these hints that she's not too upset about his white supremacist background. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So Sigourney's grandniece arrives, played by Quintessa Swindell, who I think is excellent in this film. Her and Narvel, Joel Egerton, kind of form this relationship that starts to get sexually tense.
Yes.
And not to mention that Narvel is also sleeping with Sigourney Weaver. He's kind of at her beck and call sexually.
He's closer in age to Sigourney than he is to this child.
Yeah, she's in her early 20s.
Yeah.
And he teaches her and she starts to enjoy it, but then as Sigourney suspects that they will have had sex, which they haven't, she fires both of them. And then they go on a road trip.
Yeah. Well, he's so entrenched in her life because she is from the projects or just a rough neighborhood. Joel Egerton finds out that this girl's boyfriend is beating her. And so he takes it upon himself personally to go threaten this kid.
And she's addicted to drugs too.
And she's addicted to drugs too. So now he's like, all right, I'm going to be Mr. Savior, Mr. Redeemer.
He's he takes her on this kind of cleansing road trip around the county to these different gardens. They're just kind of wandering. They just wander aimlessly. It's really weird. It's a really weird movie, guys. It's a very basic movie to me. Yeah.
And I get that. I get what Paul Schrader's trying to do in keeping the tone quiet and kind of just being very obvious with the plot and whatever meaning you want to ascribe to everything. It is on the face of it.
The road trip, this sounds so fucking basic what I'm about to say, but the road trip is just a metaphor for the journey, which is them getting to know each other and slowly falling in love ultimately, and her understanding his past and ultimately maybe not forgiving him but accepting that it's his past, right? Which is in today is a really interesting thing to do, Yeah.
She is a young, very, very young, very, very, very young black girl. Yeah. He is a white supremacist. Former white supremacist?
Yeah.
Okay. In his 40s.
A reformed white supremacist. Right. Right. As much as if that's what you think can happen, but that is the indication of the film.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
And he deliberately shows her the tattoos. Yeah. To kind of get the conversation going. Yeah. And she immediately is horrified. Kind of. It's really interesting.
She is very rightfully so quick to be horrified and almost nearly as quick to forgive or accept.
Can I give away what I think the relationship of this movie is about? Yeah. He needs someone who can accept and forgive him, and she needs someone who cares about her.
Can take care of her.
It sounds basic, but someone who cares, because she has never known anyone who cares for her. Yeah. That at the heart of it, that's the important aspect of the relationship.
That she comes from a place of abuse. Yeah. That now a reformed white supremacist is capable of loving someone like her. Yeah. And he also feels the same way, that someone as beautiful and young and full of potential is willing to forgive him for incredible sins.
Yeah, and also I think with the hints that Sigourney Weaver is kind of uncaring about his past. Yeah. Is kind of tacit acceptance of it. And he's he wants to be recognized for the man he is today and not the man he used to be. Right. Because obviously that would be really tough when you're covered in Nazi tattoos. Totally. And it's right. Really interesting.
There is, okay. And Paul Schrader wrote Taxi Driver, right?
And Raging Bull.
And Raging Bull. Yeah. So Taxi Driver, lead character, Fight Club lead character, fucking Joker lead character. These men are like a 14-year-old's almost semi role model, right? Like, or a child, or a young
like an
person,
edgy, not very
yeah,
intelligent
a young person
yeah.
would look at that and be like inspired to kind of be that way. But as an older person, we know that that is not the message of these movies. Is that do not idolize these men. Like,
Of course,
this is not the philosophy that you want to follow. Do you think Master Gardener is in that vein where someone much older than us is going to be kind of okay with this, but because our generation is more vocal and, you know what I mean? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it just kind of like, for lack of a better word, like cis het male wish fulfillment, where you're just like, yeah, cool, you did a terrible thing, but you know, as long as you're saying sorry, it's all good. Meanwhile, maybe some things should just not be forgiven.
Some things are unforgivable. I can totally see that. Like, I can see someone taking this movie that way.
And we're just allowing it because it's Paul Schrader and his, you know, genius works of art, where you're like, but the man's 75 or whatever.
I could see someone Paul Schrader, also a man who doesn't like shy away from controversial things to say.
Yeah.
But like I could see people definitely watching this and being like, no, I do not accept this reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I kind of get. And this is interesting because we talked a lot about 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is a much more high profile version of this thing. And something that I didn't say in that conversation, which I have said since, because I've kind of checked up on myself on what I think of that whole conversation. And I haven't exactly changed my mind, but in 3 Billboards, that movie is ostensibly asking us to forgive Sam Rockwell despite being a racist.
Yeah.
And I read, which is I found online, which lots of people pointed to, was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a beautiful piece in, I think, the Hollywood Reporter that I encourage everyone to go read. And his basic thing that I thought was really interesting was like, it's important to remember that we have the capacity to forgive and that people just aren't totally lost causes. Yeah. And I think that's what makes this movie a little hopeful. And it's the same thing that works in American History X, which I think is a really, really good movie and a much more difficult film than this. Because definitely. He was like Joel Egerton in this movie. Here's the difference, I think, between... Well, it's actually similar, because in this movie, Joel Egerton is also kind of a victim of a system. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And he says, he was like, I was taught to hate people who were different than me, and I was taught really well. Mm-hmm. And what we see in American History X as well is when Ed Norton thinks back on his father, and his father goes on a fairly racist diatribe about affirmative action. Mm-hmm. You see that it's like, he's also the victim of this system that makes him believe. Yeah. And then he's used by this other fucking Nazi guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I understand why there are countries that don't have the death penalty for that reason, that they recognize that man's folly, quote unquote, is a result of either upbringing or just being a part of a system where they couldn't have gotten away from it. So just, you know, trigger warning for certain words, but like rapists, murderers, you know, former Nazis are still not put to death because of the capacity of society to forgive them.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of a whole other conversation.
Is it though? Because isn't the movie kind of telling us to, now that this little black girl and this fairly older former white supremacist are in love, we should also allow them to go by their life, I guess?
Yes, yeah. It's sort of. But I actually think that, I don't think these movies, this movie, American History X, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, I don't think any of them are being like, everyone is capable of goodness, and these people should not just be forgiven, but they should be applauded, and everyone should join hands and sing Kumbaya. Yeah. I don't think that's what they're doing. No. I think, especially Master Gardener, I think that the beauty of Master Gardener is that it's just like, this is possible.
Yeah.
The possibility
Yeah.
of rehabilitation from frankly abhorrent views is, it's not like it's never happened before. And we live in a time where everything is very like black and white, and it's an all or nothing.
Totally.
And people are like, if people don't believe the same, in people who are both on my end of the political spectrum and on another, people are basically like, if you don't believe what I believe, then everything about you is terrible and you should just die.
Yeah.
And this is not true.
Yeah.
Like most people are good people, and
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
And within people is
Capacity to do terrible things.
Yes, but also what's so hopeful about this movie and Card Counter is that within people is also the capacity to believe that you can be a good person.
Yeah.
Because in Card Counter, the guy he went to prison for torturing people.
Yeah. And there is something to be said about like a young mind that does not fully develop until fucking 25 or something, right? So I guess that when you do terrible things when you're younger, it's okay to forgive.
But we also see it. We see it a lot today with people, that it's like people get influenced by lots of things
100%.
when they're young.
Yeah.
Even when they're old. Like people, you do get influenced by stuff.
Yeah.
Like people, like there's people out there in the world who would call me like a fucking brain dead liberal idiot.
Yeah.
So, everyone has a different perspective, and I don't know.
The good thing is that we can change, right? Like and it's not just from bad to good, but even the other way around, where like even my parents, for instance, if I were to talk to them about, this government versus a more hopeful government in another country, that it's worth aspiring towards living in a utopia, that they are now so much more open to it than they would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing that there's benefits to XYZ factors versus just staying in the comfort of your own fucking totalitarian nation.
Yeah.
So.
And I also think too that there's like in Master Gardener, there is kind of this thing that like the type of hate that Narvel was involved with is the hatred of hopelessness, the hatred of that everyone else, that like racism and homophobia and transphobia and all these kinds of things are just like, everyone else is taking away from me and I need to lash out to express my anger. And when you come around to being like, well, people are actually beautiful and it's good to be around people and different people and things like that, and to learn from people and to teach, and what he does in the movie, to teach people to like fucking, show them the beauty of the natural world.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what I think is so interesting about this movie. Yeah.
There's a beautiful scene where he's holding a bunch of mud in his hand.
Yeah.
And he's teaching other people around and be like, you guys, what does it smell like? Like really take it
He's
in.
like, smell it. And
Put
he
your
just stuffs
nose
it in his face. It's so interesting. Yeah. And in this movie, we have to note the surreal moment too, when they when they have sex. We don't see it. However, we do see them driving down a highway that all of a sudden becomes this luminescent flowers and garden that appears to be like Disney almost
100%.
style.
They're driving through this dark road and
Yeah.
it's dark still, but flowers start to bloom from both sides of the
And they
road.
duck out their window and start screaming. And it's like, that's not real. Like that's them fucking basically.
Right, of course,
but it is like, it's an interesting kind of like, they've finally connected, And then, just to finish up the plot here, one thing I do find interesting about this movie, speaking of all the capacity to forgive and stuff like that, in the end, one part of the movie is kind of like, some people deserve to get their fucking leg broken. Because he goes to a party and breaks those two fucking guys' legs, and he's like, I need you to remember this. And just smashes them with a hammer.
That's pretty great.
And
hey,
then,
don't hit a girl, otherwise you get your legs busted.
Oh, also, they went and they trashed the garden.
Yeah,
too.
they fucked up all their flowers.
And then Narvel returns to the garden and with Quintessa and says, like, we're going to live there together as man and wife, and I'm going to come here and work. And Sigourney Weaver is like, well, I'm really angry about that, but okay.
Yeah.
And that's where it ends.
Yeah.
And it's a good movie.
Yeah. Now, you know what? I am more accepting of it when we're talking about the capacity to forgive, right? okay, it's good that we're talking about it, but just kind of seeing it at the cinemas is a very uncomfortable feeling. And I'm I'm happy that it kind of feels uncomfortable. Like, it's a great thing that when people watch it and they walk out and go like, ugh, I don't know, maybe that's not a good thing, but I'm glad we're still kind of talking about it. In the movies, like, that's a thing that's still shown.
Yeah. I think this movie does it is poking the bear a little bit, because like hate and white supremacy are problems. They're real front and center problems that people really do care about on like a more day-to-day basis, because like America is becoming a fascist nation, and there's some people in Canada who are like, yeah, I think fascism would be a nice try. And they're just like, yeah, I don't know if I want the brown people in the country. And like, it's a true thing that's actually happening.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, which makes this movie such a spark point for those types of discussions.
Yeah, this is a movie that no Nazi's gonna watch anyway.
Yeah, exactly, that too. But also, maybe they're not quite as powerfully depicted. But First Reformed and Card Counter also have similar things, and this is how I think about it. Something that I think Ethan Hawke struggles with in First Reformed is he's a priest who has
cancer.
But he's also like, he's given his life to God.
Yes.
But he's having a crisis of faith because one thing that I think as a non-religious person is sometimes with religiosity, there's a certain amount of magical thinking that the world will be fine because the earth isn't the only world. But climate change makes it abundantly clear that things will not be fine.
Yeah.
And if you're having a crisis of faith and you stop believing that you will go to heaven when you die, and then all of a sudden you're a middle-aged man and the world around you is dying and there's not very much hope, aren't you a little kind of like, that's not, don't you feel guilty? Like, wouldn't Ethan Hawke feel guilty of being like, I can't believe, like, I could have done more. I could have done more to help the planet instead of
just fucking holding a rosary bead or whatever.
Instead of like comforting people with something that is fake.
Yes.
And that's again, like, not to insult any religious people. I'm not a religious person, but that's kind of what I believe, right?
Yeah.
It's like religion is this way of comforting you on your way to death, which happens to everyone, right? But it's a distraction ultimately. Just the same way these fucking
TV,
movies are, the same way
is,
TV and video games are,
100%,
right?
Yeah.
The same way your job, all these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And something as like big and powerful as climate change, and I don't know if people can tell, but I care a lot about it. Something as big and powerful as climate change is so existentially horrifying that it makes those things it makes you feel guilty. People feel guilty and they feel pressured and they feel like it's a climate fucking depression is like a real thing now, you know, that people feel.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not saying he's like as bad a person as Nerval Roth was as a neo-Nazi, but isn't he culpable in some way? You know, as we all are with climate change, we're culpable in some way, and there are things we could be doing. Do you know what I'm getting at?
But they also show him punishing himself for that, right?
Yeah.
Which there is like a cathartic moment for the audience to see that, to watch Ethan Hawke's character realize that, oh, he's just a fucking pawn, or he's just some guy who's been a part of the problem to a great degree, or just been at the sidelines and done nothing but just preach. And so now when he's like picking up a bottle of whiskey and takes a big old swig, you're like, okay, welcome home, my guy. And then when he is so clearly tortured, and when he confronts, you know, his pastor, when he's like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, we're not here helping the people at all.
Cedric the Entertainer, Cedric Kyles plays he's like the pastor of like a mega church, like those big,
it's like a big brand
church. It's like
church.
as big as a fucking football stadium.
It's the big swinging dick of churches.
Yeah.
It's great. And then of course that big church is sponsored by this terrible corporation where it's like the top 5, you know, contributors of pollutants in the world. That corporation is directly responsible for fucking climate change.
And they want to sponsor the event in the movie too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And then, so keeping on this topic, in the Card Counter also, like, Oscar Isaac is straight up guilty
Yeah.
of really horrible things. And I will say he's part of a system, which is the U.S. military.
Yes.
And while I know that white supremacy is like a big talking touch point right now,
Yeah.
Oscar Isaac is torturing Iraqis
Yeah.
in this movie,
Yeah.
which may not be as present because it was happening during the Iraq War,
Yeah.
but it is awful. Like, it is straight up
Oh my
like
God.
brutal. And it's I'm trying to think is that, like, there's something so poignant about white supremacy as this point of Master Gardener, where the distance of the Iraq War and all that kind of stuff makes it feel a little more like a movie, and Master Gardener feels a little more close to home.
Totally.
But they are both terrible
Horrendous.
things that happened. Yeah. And they're still happening. So, we have all that to look forward to.
Man, Card Counter has not left my mind since I saw it at the cinemas, and
It's a fantastic movie.
I got so emotional even in the theater, and
Yeah.
I was trying to like be super cool because we were on a date, but I was just a mess. There were so many moments. There's a haunting scene that is like shot in a fishbowl lens, where
it's really intense. Yeah.
It's the Abu Ghraib scene where he's obviously just not being a cool guy at all.
Yeah.
Just kind of thinking about it is like, it gives me goosebumps. But so Oscar Isaac's character being a part of a system of torture and then continuing to do that to other people is kind of, there's some parallel with that, and the church in First Reformed being a part of a corporation that pollutes the world that also kills is a part of Master Gardener, where Joel Egerton's character is a part of the system who's trying to get out of it, but I don't know.
Yeah, they're like,
it's just death upon death upon death, and then the only redemption for these men is to be saved by love.
Yeah, sort of.
It's very reductionist of me to say that, but
it's also I think like it's not even as complex as love. I still do think it's kind of like acceptance.
Yeah.
Of like, and I think with Ethan Hawke in First Reformed, it's just like someone listened to me. Yeah. Like, I was affected by what happened to Amanda Seyfried, and she also listened to me, basically. Yeah, I don't know. Like, in Master Gardener, it's the fact that he's the only person he doesn't hide his shame from is Sigourney Weaver, who doesn't really care.
No.
And
well, she's excited by it.
And he needs to show Quintessa Swindell because he doesn't want to hide from her, but
it's a shameful thing.
It's a shameful thing, but he also has to be like, I have to put all the cards on the table, because I care about this young woman, basically. I don't know. They're fucking good movies, man.
The
Solid
Card
trilogy.
Counter, when I first saw it, even from like right from the first 5 seconds of the movie, I was like, this is the most John-est of John movies of all. Like, it just, was I right or no?
Yeah, sort of.
Like, is it like kind of made for you? You were like, every single thing about this works for you?
No, not everything works about that movie to me. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's the strongest of these three.
Yeah, right.
There is definitely a lot that there's more. The thing about First Reformed that I don't connect with is the religious aspect of it. I just don't really get that.
Yeah.
And the thing about Master Gardener is I don't understand how roses works. no, like,
flowers.
Master Gardener feels a little bit more like a film to me.
Yeah.
Whereas Card Counter, I think there's a more clear emotional connection to myself in that film.
Totally.
That I really feel. And I really felt that when I was watching it yesterday. I was like, I connect more emotionally with this movie than I do, the other films.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fucking Paul Schrader.
It's a really interesting filmmaker.
Yeah, man. Oh my God. All of them have a very, very, very similar tone, similar leading man, troubled.
Yeah.
Really? On the fringes
you
of
think so?
society. And then ultimately hopeful ending. I wonder if Paul Schrader kind of hopes that for all men everywhere.
I don't know, because it's so funny because when you listen to Paul Schrader, he talks like this, and
I'm tired.
He's an intense man. And these movies are weirdly sweet. when Oscar Isaac and Tiffany Haddish like hold hands,
oh my God.
it's very sweet, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like sexy or whatever.
No.
It's just kind of like kind. Like he
Yeah.
just needed someone to touch him on the hand for once.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same with fucking Narvel. Is like he just needed. He has this impediment to anyone seeing his body, right?
Yeah.
And
In that so much that he's wearing a turtleneck, even though it's like 40 degrees out.
he's like cuffed up all the time.
Yeah.
And he has to break through that barrier, and he ends up breaking through that barrier with a person of color, which is so, it's just such an insane set of coincidences. I don't know. Like
I see what you mean by allowing himself to be forgiven, because there's a moment in Master Gardener where Joel Edgerton's character is confronted by this young black girl who's like, why the fuck don't you have your tattoos removed? And he says, because I cannot, like, I don't want to, in a way that the world should always be punishing me because I was this person, right? That is insinuated in not so many words, but
he like kind of brushes it off. He says he looked into it, but he never.
He says like, no. And then, probably in a couple of scenes later, where they finally have sex, and then she says, "You got to get rid of the tattoos," and he says, "Okay,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I'll do it now." So yeah, I think he's accepted her forgiving him, and then he's hopeful for his own future for the first time, probably.
Yeah, it's also, I think, the first time he's ever seen someone able to forgive him.
Yeah.
You know, like everyone else has either been disgusted or not cared,
yeah,
or been supportive of it, like his white supremacist buddies likely were.
Yeah.
But then like there's this woman who says like, I see them and I understand, but you have to get rid of them, basically. And then he's like finally okay with letting go of the person he was. Right?
Yeah.
And being like, I'm no longer that person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also another aspect of like, he was a drug addict and he changed, like he went to, and that's like kind of a metaphorical change as well, is like, coming through, like part of, I think it's interesting because like, I don't know a lot about addiction because I've never been part of that, but like you always see it when it's depicted in film and stuff. It's always like, and I think it's, I don't know a lot about it, but people who are addicts, it's not like they go there and they're like, I'm no longer an alcoholic. They always say they're like still an alcoholic. They just don't like drink or do drugs anymore or whatever. Yeah. And like in this movie, it's like he was always that person, but he's changed. And now he's no longer that person. And it's
right.
Yeah.
Wow. What a sobering.
Yeah. This is a very serious episode. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm glad we talked about all of them though, because I fucking love Card Counter. So I'm glad like Master Gardener. Why is it so hard to say this?
Master
Gardeners. Through this film, I was able to express my love for other Schraders.
Yeah.
Schrader's works.
Yeah. And they're all better than Black Swan. That is guaranteed. Unless you like that movie for some reason. That'd be really weird.
But they're not better than Honey. So
fuck it. What is better than Honey? Yeah.
Do you think there's a crime that should be unforgiven?
No, I don't think so. I think I do. One thing I think that maybe draws me to this movie is I do think people have the capacity to change, even people who are so far gone. Like, because like it much like The Wire. The Wire is a really good example of this, and something David Simon said about The Wire was that like that show is about how people are victims of systems, and how the overarching thing about society is that people are all part of the machine in a way. And I think that like even like white supremacists, even people in the military who've committed crimes or things like that, like they are in a way. Oh, you know what's really interesting? I watched Women Talking.
Oh yeah.
So
tell me about it.
It's good. First of all, I mean, no fucking doubt. It's a good movie, but there's something really interesting in that movie where one of the women says that it's a let me spoiler alert to everybody. Women are talking.
Women be talking.
Women been done talking in Women Talking. Yeah. They're like, they talk for almost 2 hours in that film.
Nice. Good talk though.
Good talk. But it's lots of like, they get into kind of like they get into a very philosophical chat about this violence that's been done to them.
Yeah.
And one of the women says that, we're victims. We've been treated like animals, as you saw in the trailer. Someone says we've been treated like animals. And another woman starts talking about how, like, well, the men are educated to be this way. And then some other woman says, so the men are also victims. And another woman's like, yeah. And that's kind of like really what women talking has just epitomized what we're trying to say about these 3 fucking movies. But like, that is like, I don't think there is a crime that is unforgivable or deserving of death because those types of crimes, I think a lot of the shame should be on the system that has created people like that. Yeah. I'm not saying people aren't responsible for their actions. They are. Yeah. But it's like the gun control debate in the United States is like the system should change. And people keep resisting because they're just like, yeah, but what if I go to McDonald's and I don't have a fucking AK-47 on me? What then?
How can I consume my fries?
How can I be safe dipping my fries into vanilla fucking without my AK-47? How can I protect my children if I don't have 4 guns strapped to my chest at all times? The mass shooting and murder won't be solved by systemic change completely, but it's like, but it's a step towards like solving a lot of issues. Yeah. And that's really what I think is that, like, when horrific crimes like that happen, a large part of the shame should be on like the state or the system or the place that it occurs within, kind of. That's my take on it. Yeah. And we should always be looking to improve that for people, basically.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, like, look at, there's lots of things that are like people that were crime a long time ago, and the system changed and it's made things better for people. Yeah.
Like
speaking of racism, like, it was a crime for black people to do certain things in the United States, and the system changed, and it hasn't made life perfect, but it's made life better. And it's improved outcomes for people, basically.
Laws are dumb.
Yeah, and also like, not the wholly like libertarian thing of just being like, well, everyone's responsible for their own safety actions and stuff like that is just kind of like, but we all live in society. Yeah. Like,
we're in a society, bro.
Yeah, bro. Like, we all kind of have to work together in this whole thing, pull together, and which is the ultimate thing about like climate change and first reform too. Is like, it's I think people have individual things that they can do about climate change, but it's also kind of like, but we all got to do stuff collectively. Yeah, we're all on this planet together.
Everybody is hopeful that, even if shit gets terrible, we will all adapt and then come together. I think the looming fear is that even if we all come together to adapt, it will be too late.
Which it will. Like, that's the way it's heading, and it doesn't mean that there's like no future to be had. Totally. It's just the future will be really hard. Yeah. That's all.
That's all.
Yeah. We can save our climate change discussion for our episode on honey, because that's a big
These hip-hop clubs do be polluting.
Jessica Alba is polluting the dance floor out there with her moves. Yeah. Have you ever seen Honey?
I've seen it 13 times.
I've never seen Honey.
I love that movie so much.
Master Gardener. It's a good movie. To me, you, Chris, Nat, Paul Schrader, the only people on earth who've seen the movie. Everyone else should go see it. Should support small movies like this. They're interesting. Yeah. They're good.
Makes you think. And thinking do be good.
Unlike this podcast, it makes you think. All right. I love every one of you.
Bye.
Sort of. Bye.